1 year ago, I started working on my indie game, and today I'm still working on it. It's still not done, but I'm getting there. Welcome guys, welcome to another devlog here. Hope you guys have been doing great and wonderful on this day. I am here making this video on my 1 year journey of working on this indie game. So hope you guys are excited. You know, if you don't have any snacks, feel free to get some, and let's get started on this bad boy. The main idea for this game, which is basically the story for this game, is basically you end up buying a farm and you move in with your father. You eventually start finding out that something strange is going on, and you start to figure out what's going on. And you'll be able to find out through clues, through dialogue with other NPCs, and then you try figuring out and piece it together, and hopefully maybe there's a way for you to fix it. And not only that, I mentioned in my previous devlogs, but if you're new here, I love fishing. I grew up fishing with my father in my younger years when I was a child, and I really loved that. I really miss doing that and fishing with my dad. And I wanted to create a special event here where there's gonna be special fishing events where you can be fishing with your dad and special stuff happens, and that's something I'd like to incorporate into this game. That's basically the main story for this game. So one thing to mention is that even though this project started a year ago, I actually don't have 1 year's of work on this game just because things got in the way, life happens, and I will be mentioning that over later on in the video. So let's dive in into my progress into this game. For the first month, it's been a year since I've been laid off. I just got laid off in a bad time, as you guys noticed or heard about already, all these layoffs that is happening. It's been really difficult to land a job, but I'm just gonna keep trying and see what's up, you know. But at the time I was like, you know what, let's make a game. I decided to use Godot because I was doing some research trying to figure out what kind of engine I wanted to use. And I ended up learning about Godot and hearing about a lot of people liking this game engine that was easy to use, and I really like that. And not only that, it is open source, and the size of this game engine is very small compared to Unity. So you know what, I want to see what this game engine is about, so I decided to use Godot. I really wanted to use C++ as my language, so I went with GD extension with C++, and I don't know why, I just really love making things harder for myself for whatever reason. It is what it is, you know. But I really put those challenges on me just because I really love to learn new things, because what's the point of doing the same thing over and over and you're not learning new things? So that's why I put these challenges on top of things that I do on every project I start. So keep that in mind as I'm going through this game. I wanted to start off with this game using gray boxing, and if you never heard of this concept before, gray boxing is basically you're in the stage where you want to start blocking out your level, but you have no art. So you're basically using regular shapes, especially the ones that provide the game engine provides for you, like the cubes and the capsules and all of that, and you just have that to build and block out your level. And it's a concept where you can do this in prototyping. It makes it easier and faster to be able to convey the features that you're adding into the game. And also during this stage, you're also open to use any previous assets or assets from the asset store. And that's how I started off when I'm working in the game industry, in my experience. And then later on in the development cycle, I will start adding the art that I would like to have for this game. So art always comes at the end. That's how it is in the game industry. In my experience, art always comes at the end. So I ended up creating this scene where you're in the beach area, and I used a temporary character there. And I started working with the farming mechanic for the game. That was the first feature that I started working on, which is the farming, where you can plant crops on soil and have the different growth stages that it's going to have. After working with the crops, I also worked on having the character be able to move with the navigation area or the pathing system. You know, you can click anywhere that you want and the character will move to it. And I need a navigation area in order to avoid any obstacles that are on the way, right? So I ended up using that, which wasn't great, just because you were not able to disable diagonal movement, which I didn't like. I don't know why you don't have access to it, but eventually you had to create a new script that inherits from it and you disable it yourself. But at the time I wasn't working on that, and the next thing that I worked on is adding time into my game. I wanted the game to tell me, hey, it's 6 a.m. or it's 7 a.m. or it's midnight or whatever it's going to be. So I ended up adding a little watch, and it tells you the time that it's going to be. Still don't know if I'm going to keep that, or I may end up using something, using the watch in a certain way. I don't know yet. Or I may end up just changing it to something completely new later on. But for the time being, I think this is a great way to represent what the time is. That's what it's basically what the first month was about. Doing the farming, doing movement for the player, having the ability to pick up items on the floor, and also the ability to, whatever you click on, it will do a certain action when it reaches that location. So if it reaches just an empty grass, it just doesn't do anything. But if you click on the soil and you have an active item on your inventory, it will, let's say you have the hoe and you click on soil, it will then, once it reaches it, it will till the soil. So basically that's what I worked on for the first month. All right, so for the second month, there was a pretty big month. that I worked on for this game, and that had to do with procedural generation. I wanted this game to be procedure generated, and initially what I wanted for this game to be was to be infinitely generated, so you can go anywhere, whatever. You can go like a Minecraft, be able to roam the level. So every time a new instance you create, a new instance of your game, it's going to be different. It's not going to be the same. You can input a seed just like in Minecraft, and it will generate the world depending on that seed. So I started working on that mechanic of procedural generation, and initially I started working on with just regular height maps using Perlin noise, mixing a couple of Perlin noise maps together and generating something that you will be able to traverse, which created something pretty cool in certain situations, which was pretty nice. It wasn't something that I was really happy about. So that was the first instance for me working on it, and that's where wave function collapse comes into play. I started learning a little bit more how wave function collapse works, and I started implementing that into the game, and it did produce really cool generations when looking at it. But there were certain sections in that generation that it didn't look correct to me. In the end, I ended up changing it and away from wave function collapse because I couldn't figure out how to fix those areas. But that had to do with the lack of knowledge that I had with wave function collapse, and I didn't really want to dive in deeper into it. There's different variations of wave function collapse, where there's one where you could add an input into the wave function collapse, like an image, and a wave function collapse will produce something similar to that image, right? I didn't use that version of wave function collapse, so I ended up moving away and coming back to the original procedural generation that I had before with the Perlin noises, and I ended up keeping that. I also worked on the A-star pathfinding as well. Like I mentioned last month, I mentioned that I didn't really like that version of the pathing just because you couldn't disable diagonal. So I ended up inheriting from A-star grid to D, which in there you're able to disable the diagonal movement of it. But unlike the navigation to D that I also was using, I couldn't use that either because this is a procedural world and there was no easy way to lay out the navigation to D, right? So I scrapped that. I ended up using, since I knew which each tile was going to be, because that's what the procedural generation was telling me, like, hey, this tile is going to be grass, or this is going to be a tree, we'll have a tree in it, or it will tell me the obstacles that it will have. So I ended up using this information to determine if this tile should be walkable or not. So that's what I ended up using as an input for my A-star 2D. And after working with that, I ended up working with the pond shader, or not pond, but it's like water shader. If this is your first time here, I really love water shaders or anything that has to do with water. I don't know why, I just really love it. And what I wanted to do in my game is to be able to look under water as well. You're able to see it, and you also can see like caustics. Forgive me for the mispronunciation on that, but you're able to see all of that refraction and all of that. That's something I really wanted to have in this game. So I ended up implementing that shader, and it looks super cool. I really love that. There's just one thing with reflection, right? You're able to see the reflection of yourself and all of that. And I did have that in here, but it was kind of like a hacky way of doing it. So if I ever want to do that in the future, I will need to find a better way of doing that, but for the time being, it worked. And after working with that, I ended up working on a different generation, separate from procedural generation for the outer world. You're also going to go into caves and all of that, and you will have dungeons, right? And I wanted these dungeons to be also kind of procedurally generated, but not really. I wanted to still have control of what I wanted to be in each of the rooms. So what I did was to have rooms that had connections, either it's going to be north, east, south, and west, northeast or northwest, southwest, and all of that. To have different rooms that have different connections like that, and basically use some type of randomization or RNG that will determine which of the rooms should be selected to be connected in here. And I can tell it how much connections I want it to have, which worked great. And that's basically the main implementation that I did in here for this month, which was great. You know, it was a big month here. We're doing procedural generation and all of that, and I was excited to continue forward. All right, so for the next month, I started off with hooking up the dungeon generation with the outer world, so that when you enter the dungeon, you come out at the same place. So there were some things that I needed to keep track of in the code to be able to make this work as you transition into a different scene. Another thing that I worked on is the skill system for this game. There's going to be certain skills that you're able to level up, such as foraging, fishing, farming, or something with combat. Every time you're doing certain actions within these things, you're able to level up after a certain time, and when you level up, you'll get some buffs for your character. And it's not something that you need to do, it's not necessary, it's not going to be mandatory, but it is there if you guys decide to actually want to do it. Another thing that I added with this in the skill system, which is not implemented in the game just yet, is the lockpicking. You're able to lockpick chests, and that will give you certain buffs when you're doing lockpicking. I would love to implement that. I think it'd be pretty cool, just like Fallout does it. So if you guys play Fallout, if any of you guys do, when you're doing the little mini game with the pins, when you're rotating in and all of that, I think that would be pretty cool to have that in the game. And the next thing that I started working on, which is fishing. Like I mentioned, I wanted to have fishing in this game, and I really wanted to have something similar to how Animal Crossing has it. Their fishing mechanic, I really love their fishing mechanic in Animal Crossing New Horizons, and I really love seeing the shadow of the fish in the water. I got some inspiration from that to be able to do that in my game. Yeah, and one thing that you're able to do in the fishing is that for the fishing rod, you're able to equip multiple different equipment to it, so different types of reels, fishing line, and the type of bait you're going to be using, right? And all of this, you're going to have different types of reels and type of fishing lines and all of that, and each of these things that you equip to your rod will improve the efficiency of that rod and be able to catch bigger fish. So that's a really cool mechanic that I added into this game. It gives you an option, you know, if you want to make it hard for yourself when it comes to fishing, or you want to make it easier for yourself. The next thing that I worked on in here was doing the splash screen, which is what you've seen throughout this entire Devlogs. Pretty sure you've seen the splash screen for this game already, and I started working with the initial splash screen for it, and I really loved it, you know. So the next thing that I worked on is the weather system, and it's something that I really would love to add in this game, to have like rainy days, thunder, super windy, and all of these types of weather you can have in the game. And I wanted to incorporate that into here, and it gets determined depending on the type of day that you're in. And that's basically what I worked on for this month. But one thing I do wanted to mention, now that we're done with this month, this is where things started getting a little bit more difficult for me when it comes to working on this game. I wasn't doing that great financially, so I needed to find a side job that I had to do, which took away some time away from working on this project. So I didn't have that much Devlogs that I was doing throughout the next months coming in for this project. So I wasn't always working on this game. There was been days where it's been weeks that I never touched it, just because it got super busy. It got tired when I came back home, and I just didn't want to do anything. So, you know, adulting is hard, guys. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that ahead of time, that the next couple of months, which goes through all the way to the end, I started having less time working on this project, but I was still working on it. So I didn't give up on it. So yeah, so let's get started. For the next month, I started working adding some more animations for the character, even though the character keeps updating and still not the final main character that you can be playing as. But I started adding more animations for the character, for the different types of things that you do. Either it'd be like you're holding something, or it's gonna be for fishing, where you're casting, all of that. That's something that I really wanted to do, and also be able to have different animations for when you're doing crops, or when you're watering your crops, doing the hoe, planting the seeds and all of that. So that's something that I started working on. And then I started working on the visuals of how I want the caves to look like, which ended up being super cool. I really love the way that I implemented this visual for the cave. I really love the hazy look that it had with the god rays coming down, and I just really love the way I just can keep looking at it. I can have like a screensaver for this and a loop. I can watch that all day. I really love the way that I implemented it. And in here as well, I started looking into updating my animations. Before I was just using the animation player, and then I started incorporating the animation trees in here, which I really love. This is something that is very similar to how Unreal does its animation system with the state machines and all of that, and I really love that. And I started updating it to use that in my game as well, to have the different types of state machines and be able to go to different states, and that determines what kind of animation it's going to be using. That's basically it for this month. And so for this next month, what I started off with is upgrading Godot. I was using Godot 4.2, and then I wanted to upgrade to 4.3. And I really want to do that because it has some updates to the tile map. It ended up changing from tile map to tile map layers, and you had a little bit more control over them. I did encounter some bugs when working on this, just because it was something weird bug that was happening. That since, like I mentioned, I was using GD extension C++. And the way that I just fixed this bug was just to delete the entire Godot C++ repo and re-download it again, for the reason that ended up working. But I did get stuck on that for a little bit. I also ended up doing some updates to the fog inside the cave that I mentioned before. Before, it was always following you. It was kind of weird, you know. So what I did, the fog moved in the opposite direction of the player, kind of like parallaxing. So it looks like the clouds or the fogs is actually moving away, rather than being static, and it looked kind of weird at the beginning. But after doing this update to the fog, it looks 1,000 times better than it did before. Well, the next thing I worked on for this month was working on implementing AI, and this is where the loving beautiful slime starts coming in for my game. So I started using Limbo AI, adding the behavior trees for the slimes, and what I have for them was just having just simple states for them, which they patrol, they roam around, right, and then they attack the player once they get close, or they see the player. And I will have some initial first iteration with combat. It didn't really do much at the beginning. Be able to attack the slimes and be able to start doing damage with them. And that's basically what I worked on for this month. And I was just having fun with AI here. I started incorporating a bunch of lots of slimes in here, which was pretty fun at the time. Sometimes you gotta make the development a little bit fun sometimes, you know, so that was pretty great. For this next month, it is January. It's a brand new 2025 is here already. So happy new year to you guys. For this month, what I started working on was adding new actions for the player. You can now chop down trees, which was actually pretty awesome at the time. Actually chopping down the trees, I added a shader to them so that every time you hit them, it creates this like flashing effect. The tree knocks back a little bit and it comes back to normal as you're hitting it. After you chop them up, it also provides you with resources. It will give you wood, and then I started doing that with the rocks. The rocks does the same thing, but instead of producing wood, it will give you, for the time being right now, it's just a piece of rock. And after working with that, I started looking into doing something with NPCs. So I incorporated like a shop house for the time being, where there's going to be a shopkeeper where you're able to interact with them and be able to see what you can buy or sell. And before I started doing that though, I needed to implement a plugin to be able to do some dialogue. And what I ended up using was Dialogic. Seemed like, you know, pretty easy to implement. So you're now able to interact with NPCs such as the shopkeeper and be able to go through the dialogue, like go to their items that they're selling, or you're able to sell your own items to them as well. So here, yeah, it's the first iteration for dialogue system here, and that I'll be using as I keep working on this project. And that's basically it for that month. For the next 2 months, I actually didn't really do any devlogs just because I got super busy. My side job, it just ended up taking time away from this game, but I did work on it little bit by little bit over time. So it wasn't enough to do a devlog at the time. So for the next months, there wasn't anything. For the next month, I started working with implementing the village and farm scenes. The village and farm scenes was something that I wanted to add on top of the procedural generation because I wanted to have control on how the village is going to look like and your farm. And what I had to do was basically get these scenes and be able to overlay it on top of the procedure generation. I will have 2 distinctive positions, and using these 2 positions, I can tell the procedure generation to not do any procedure generation in this area. So that's how I ended up laying out my farm scenes and my village scenes in here. The next thing I worked on after that was to add a new tool, and that ends up being the scythe. So you're able to cut down grass that you want to remove. And then I work with outlines. So every time, what I wanted to do is basically to outline certain things that you're able to interact with. So every time, wherever your mouse is at, and anything under the mouse location, it will highlight any things that you're able to interact with. So it creates this white outline like around the actual sprite. And not only did I just add a new tool here, I also added a new weapon, which ends up being the dagger, which actually gives you a way better way of attacking, where you're able to attack while you're walking, running. It attacks a lot faster than the heavy sword, and that was something cool to add. It was pretty fun trying to hit all the slimes that were around me. It felt so much better. And then after adding that, I ended up making some updates to the camera. Before, it was very static, and the player will always be in the center of the screen. So I decided to strip away the camera from the player so that I can have more control of how the camera feels and what it's going to be doing. And the change that I made to it was that the camera will move slightly a little bit more forward in front of the character, and you'll have more visual feedback of what's going up ahead and the direction that the player is going, and it'll prepare you for anything that you need to prepare for. And doing this change made the game so much better. It made it feel a lot better than it was before. And after adding that, now that I have all of these village scenes that I added earlier, was to start filling up the village to incorporate all of the NPCs that will be there. I added I think about 5 different NPCs in here: the blacksmith, the elder, the shopkeeper, which you've already seen before, the doctor, and then the fisherman. And they're kind of like temporary for now. They're not all the houses. They all look the same for the time being until I have better assets for these. I don't want to dive in too much into here, and then it's gonna get updated later on again anyway. And that's basically it for this month for the devlog. One thing I do want to mention is that at the end of this month, I did end up getting a job. It is just a contract job though. It's a month-to-month contract job. So by the end of the month, I'm told to see if I'm going to keep working for the next month. So it is not long-term. And I will mention what this brings into the channel later on after I do the next month though. All right, so for this next month, I started off with doing the avatar creation. So every time you create a new game, you will be brought into this UI where it incorporate the logic for this character customization, where you're going to have a color wheel, give it what color you want for certain parts of the character. Either it's going to be for the shirt, pants, shoes, your skin color, your eye color, and facial hair, and all of that. So you're given all the options for this for your avatar creation. And once you load in into the game, you will remember those changes and the updates that you made for the avatar, and that's the avatar that you'll be using. The next thing that I wanted to work on was quest, which basically I want to have this game to have some type of objective so the player knows what to do. So you'll be given quests by NPCs, or maybe you find something that gives you a quest, either because you found a clue. And after that, I did some optimizations. I did a lot of optimizations. So there's like an optimization phase right now, which is not the fun part when it comes to doing development, but it's something that you must do. And I did some optimizations with the A-star grid 2D. Also how my procedural world gets generated, since it gets generated in chunks. I need to do some optimizations with that it avoids any hiccups every time you transition to a new chunk. So with that, it also came with me doing some optimization with trees and how they get visually drawn, so you're not rendering all the trees, and I updated it so that it only renders the trees nearby you. So the next thing that I wanted to jump into is the character movement. When I first started this project, I was looking and doing some research on what would be the best way to do movement for a character, and I ended up using that logic that they had. And over the course of the months, I started feeling like this wasn't the best logic. I didn't really like the way that it felt when you were moving the character. It felt very restricted. And I finally got the chance to make some updates on this for this month. So what I changed it into is that I scrapped the logic that I was using before completely. I deleted it and ended up updating it to use velocity and acceleration instead. And making that update, it made the character feel so much better, and the movement felt right. It felt like it was in the correct place and didn't make the player feel restricted. And that basically wraps it up for this month. So now for the final month, it is the 1 year mark of where I started this project. And what I started working on for this month was working on adding fertilizer to the crops, something that I always wanted to add, and it was in the backlog for this game. I'm gonna make it really basic, where for right now, I'm just gonna make one fertilizer that will update the speed of how fast the crops is gonna grow. So it's pretty simple, nothing crazy about that. And after working with that, I ended up working with AI. Started thinking about how I want the AI to spawn in this game. And this is a procedural world, so I had to find out how I want the enemies to spawn in this game and where to spawn it. And after coming up with a formula and using the procedural data that I had, I was able to determine in good places where the spawners should be at in order to avoid having so many spawners nearby each other, right? And I can use that depending on the chunks that you're in. Each chunk is going to have its own spawners that it's going to have, and I can then, using the procedural data, I can determine like what type of enemies should spawn there, or animals. When I start adding animals in here, either it's going to be like squirrels or bunnies or whatever I decide to add that will bring life into this game. And I think I got in a good place where I can, right now I'm just in the tweaking stage where I just want to start tweaking this, and I need to start getting more enemy assets or animal assets that I can start tweaking and using in the game. And that's basically where I'm at right now. And that is where I am at my 1 year journey working on this game called Edenville. It's been an exciting year working on this game, even though this year had its ups and downs. I'm still excited to keep working on this game. I had a lot of plans for the future of this game, so hopefully you guys will stay tuned for that. And I appreciate you guys, for those that have stuck with me through this entire time, especially since the beginning, but also all you guys that just joined as well. I appreciate you guys for joining on this journey. Throughout this year working on this game, I've learned a lot, especially how Godot works and how to make games in Godot, and the issues that I've had with Godot while working on this game. I learned how to overcome those issues. I even make videos on some of the bugs that I've had and how to work around it, and like debugging infinite loop, things I learned when it comes to animation, such as like animation trees and advanced expressions and how to use them. And I made videos on it and upload them to my channel, so feel free to go check them out if you guys want to learn about these issues and how to overcome them. But so far, I really love working on Godot. It's been a great experience, and given that how it is easy to build this game, especially to mobile, still have a lot more that Godot has in store that I have not touched. I'm excited to keep working on it and see how things go in the future. As I mentioned before, I recently ended up getting a job, which ends up helping me out a lot. Like I mentioned before, it's a contract job, so it's not permanent, but it still is definitely helpful. And with that, I'm able to do live streams a little bit more than I've been trying to do. I've been doing it 3 times a week, which is Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And at least I try to do 2 hours. As long as I'm having this job, I'll be doing live streams. Otherwise, I need to go back to my side job, which I don't really want to do because I don't like it, but it is what it is, because it's not something that I like doing. It's not my profession, I love working on games and doing all this stuff. But anyways, that's about it. If you guys are interested in joining the live streams, feel free to be there. Otherwise, you can always watch it later on when it gets uploaded. But anyways, that's about it, guys. Here's hoping to the future that everything turns out to be good. also have a Discord that is public. Feel free to join it if you guys want to come in and just have chats and everything. The link is in the description, so feel free to check it out. And if you guys enjoy this content, hopefully this is not too long, so I'm gonna make this really quick. So if you guys enjoy this content, feel free to subscribe or follow, even if you're not sure about it yet, because you can always change your mind later on. But anyways, guys, hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a great day, a wonderful night, depending on your time, and I'll talk to you guys later. Signing out.